What caused the deadliest conflict in human history? A war that would reshape the world and leave an indelible mark on the collective memory of humanity. And how did the world, fractured and weary, come together to put an end to such unprecedented destruction and chaos? These are questions that continue to fascinate and haunt us decades after the guns fell silent, as we seek to understand the complexities and the human cost of this monumental conflict. The Second World War was a global catastrophe that engulfed nations, drawing in countries from every corner of the globe into a vortex of violence and destruction. It toppled empires that had stood for centuries, redrawing borders and redefined the very meaning of warfare with new technologies and strategies. It was a clash of ideologies, a battle for resources, and a struggle for the very soul of humanity, pitting democracy against fascism, freedom against tyranny. The seeds of this devastating conflict were sown in the ashes of the First World War, a war that was supposed to end all wars, but instead laid the groundwork for an even greater catastrophe. The Treaty of Versailles, intended to bring peace, instead bred resentment and instability, particularly in Germany, where the harsh terms of the treaty were seen as a national humiliation. Germany, burdened by crippling reparations and territorial losses, seethed with anger and a thirst for revenge, creating a fertile ground for radical ideologies to take root. Economic depression gripped the globe, creating fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root as people sought solutions to their desperate circumstances. In this atmosphere of uncertainty and fear, powerful and dangerous ideologies began to emerge, promising simple solutions to complex problems. Nationalism, fueled by economic hardship and political opportunism, spread like wildfire, igniting passions and prejudices that had long been simmering beneath the surface. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party exploited this simmering discontent, promising to restore German pride and power and to overturn the humiliations of the past. Across Europe and Asia, similar movements gained traction, each with their own twisted vision for the future, leading to a dangerous and volatile international landscape. The world watched with a mixture of apprehension and indifference as the storm clouds gathered, unaware of the horrors that awaited and the immense human suffering that would soon unfold on an unprecedented scale. In Germany, Hitler's Nazi party, preaching a toxic blend of racial purity and national superiority, rose to power. Hitler's venomous rhetoric, amplified by the new technology of radio, resonated with a population desperate for a scapegoat and eager for a return to glory. In Italy, Benito Mussolini, a charismatic but ruthless dictator, established a fascist regime that glorified violence and suppressed dissent. Mussolini, dreaming of recreating the Roman Empire, embarked on a campaign of military expansion in Africa, seeking to establish Italy as a dominant power on the world stage. Meanwhile, across the globe, Imperial Japan, driven by militaristic ambitions and a desire for resources, embarked on a brutal campaign of conquest in Asia. Japan, under the iron fist of Emperor Hirohito and his advisors, sought to establish a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, a thinly veiled euphemism for Japanese domination of the region. These three nations, driven by a toxic cocktail of nationalism, militarism, and expansionism, would form the Axis powers, the architects of the most destructive conflict in human history. Their actions, a deadly combination of aggression, appeasement, and miscalculation, would plunge the world into darkness. The world watched in horror as Hitler, emboldened by inaction and appeasement, marched his armies across Europe. His fiery speeches and grandiose parades masked the sinister intentions that lay beneath as he sought to reshape the continent under the iron fist of the Third Reich. Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland fell victim to the Nazi war machine, their sovereignty crushed under the relentless advance of German forces. The swift and brutal invasions left these nations reeling, their people caught in the grip of fear and uncertainty. Their pleas for help ignored by a world paralyzed by fear and indecision. European leaders, caught in a web of diplomatic entanglements and political calculations, failed to mount a unified response. Civilians, meanwhile, fled their homes, seeking refuge from the encroaching darkness. The Nazi blitzkrieg, a devastating combination of air power and mechanized infantry, swept across the continent, seemingly unstoppable. This new form of warfare, characterized by speed and surprise, left traditional defenses in tatters and sowed chaos among the Allied forces. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, shattering the fragile peace. The invasion was swift and merciless, with German tanks and troops overwhelming Polish defenses. The skies were darkened by the ominous presence of bombers, raining destruction upon cities and towns. 2 days later, Great Britain and France, bound by treaty obligations, declared war on Germany. The declarations marked the beginning of a long and arduous struggle, as both nations mobilized their forces and prepared for the battles that lay ahead. The Second World War had begun. Headlines around the globe announced the grim news, and soldiers marched off to war, leaving behind families and loved ones. Maps of Europe were redrawn as the conflict spread, engulfing the continent in a maelstrom of violence and destruction. What began as a European conflict quickly escalated into a global conflagration, drawing in nations from every corner of the globe. The war's reach extended far beyond the battlefields of Europe as alliances were forged and broken, and new fronts opened in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. The United States, initially hesitant to become embroiled in another European war, provided material aid to the beleaguered allies through the Lend-Lease Act. American factories roared to life, producing the weapons and supplies needed to sustain the fight against the Axis powers. However, it was the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, that finally shattered American isolationism and galvanized the nation for war. The surprise assault left the US Pacific Fleet in ruins and ignited a fierce resolve among the American people. The world was now locked in a life-or-death struggle against the forces of tyranny and oppression. Allied forces fought valiantly on multiple fronts, driven by a shared determination to defeat the Axis powers and liberate those suffering under their brutal regimes. The outcome of this epic clash would determine the fate of nations and shape the course of human history for generations to come. As the war drew to a close, world leaders convened to chart a path forward, and victory celebrations erupted across the globe. The task of rebuilding a shattered world began, laying the foundations for a new era of international cooperation and peace. Section 4. A glimmer of hope, turning the tide. The early years of the war were dark times for the Allies. The Axis powers, led by Nazi Germany, seemed unstoppable as they swept through Europe with ruthless efficiency. Nazi Germany, seemingly invincible, rampaged across Europe, crushing all resistance in its path. The blitzkrieg tactics employed by the German forces left many nations reeling and struggling to mount an effective defense. The Soviet Union, invaded by its former ally in 1941, fought valiantly but suffered staggering losses. The initial onslaught by the German Wehrmacht was devastating, pushing deep into Soviet territory and causing immense destruction. However, amidst the darkness, glimmers of hope began to emerge. The resilience of the Allied forces and the indomitable spirit of the civilians under occupation started to show signs of turning the tide. The Battle of Britain, a testament to the courage and resilience of the Royal Air Force, shattered Hitler's dreams of a swift victory. The RAF's determined defence of the British skies not only protected the United Kingdom from invasion, but also provided a crucial morale boost to the Allied cause. The stubborn resistance of the Soviet people, combined with the harsh Russian winter, blunted the Nazi advance in the east. The German army, unprepared for the severe conditions, found itself bogged down and suffering heavy casualties. In the Pacific, the United States, reeling from the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, began to mobilize its vast industrial and military might. The attack galvanized the American public and government, leading to a massive and rapid buildup of military forces. American factories, working around the clock, churned out ships, planes, and tanks at an astonishing rate. The sheer industrial capacity of the United States became a critical factor in the Allied war effort, providing the necessary resources to sustain prolonged combat. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. The combined efforts of the Allied nations started to yield results, with small but significant victories on various fronts. The Allied victory at El Alamein in North Africa marked the beginning of the end for the Axis forces in that theatre. Under the command of General Montgomery, the British Eighth Army successfully repelled the German and Italian forces, securing a crucial strategic advantage. The Battle of Stalingrad, a brutal and costly struggle, broke the back of the German army in the east. The fierce urban combat and the eventual encirclement of the German Sixth Army by Soviet forces marked a turning point in the war, signaling the beginning of a relentless Soviet advance towards Berlin. Section 5 D-Day, landing in history, June 6, 1944, a date forever etched in the annals of history. Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in history, commenced on the beaches of Normandy, France. D-Day, as it became known, was a pivotal moment in the war, marking the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Under a shroud of secrecy, Allied forces, led by General Dwight D. Eisenhower, had been planning this daring operation for months. The stakes were incredibly high. Failure would mean prolonging the war and condemning countless more to death. As the sun rose over the English Channel, thousands of ships carrying soldiers from across the globe approached the French coastline. The air crackled with tension as paratroopers descended behind enemy lines, tasked with securing key objectives. On the beaches, facing fierce resistance, Allied forces fought with incredible courage and determination. D-Day was a costly victory, but it marked a turning point in the war. The liberation of France had begun, paving the way for the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany.